In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this serving board with this beautiful inlay in it, using the new feature in version 12 of VCarve Pro and Aspire called the VCarve Inlay. Let me show you how it's done. So before we get started and get too far into this, I hope that you've all taken the time to watch the tutorial video called How to Get Started with the VCarve Inlay. It's important to watch at some point, hopefully after this. Don't pause this right now and go watch it now. But after we do this, have a look if you have any questions, and that'll really give you some good insight into how to actually use the VCarve Inlay toolpath strategy that's included in the software. Now, what's going to be nice about this project is I'm going to show you a very practical way to use it, because some of the stuff isn't covered in the actual toolpath strategy. So you're going to need to know some extra things on top of that. Now, out there in the world of VCarve inlays, it's a really hot topic. Everybody does it just a little bit different. So what I hope you'll do is you'll take away what I'm going to show you today and go back and take a look at some other resources, other videos, go take a look at the Vectric user forum and see what other people are doing, and maybe mix and match those a little bit so you can get the best results out of your VCarve inlays. Now, my first tip for you today is we need to make sure that the material that we are going to pocket into is nice and flat. So I've got this nice piece of beech here with a nice sort of live edge on it. So what we're going to do is we're going to put an inlay right on the left-hand side of this board. But I need to make sure this is super flat. So I'm going to use this Weldon tool here. It's a surfacing bit. I'm going to go ahead and surface it off nice and flat before we get started. That way I can be reassured that I'm off to a really good start when it comes to gluing in my plugs into my pocket and make sure it's nice and flat, and also making sure I get nice even pockets across my job. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now, and once we get that all finished up, we'll come back and we'll hop right into the software and we'll get started designing up this project. So that turned out really good. That was my first time ever using a surfacing bit, and that's really quite happy. I like that a lot. So we're ready now to go ahead and get started actually creating our design. Now, like a lot of inlays already, you probably have a decent idea of already what materials you're going to be using. So we know I'm going to be using that beech over there, so I can measure the dimensions of that. And I'm also going to use this piece of walnut and this piece of purple heart. Hopefully in the end. I've never used purple heart before, so we're going to see how that goes. Got some double-sided tape to hold all this down to the spoil board. Calipers are important because I'm going to need to make sure I get accurate measurements of how thick this material is, and also I'm going to check to make sure that the dimensions of my tools are proper before I create my tooling. And a notepad, just because you never know when you got to sketch something down. So let's go ahead now and hop right into the software where I've got part of the job already started. Okay, so as I've mentioned, I already have VCarve Pro already opened up. So the VCarve Inlay toolpath is only available in VCarve Pro and Aspire. If you have VCarve Desktop, of course, you can still do it the old-fashioned long way if you'd like to. But if you plan on doing a lot of these, investing or upgrading into VCarve Pro or Aspire might be a good option for you, because this tool will get you 80% there, and really super easy, which I hope you'll see in a second. So what I have already set up in the software is 3 sheets. One is at the size of the top of the piece of beech that we surfaced on the CNC machine. Didn't worry about the edge trim a little bit, or that little live edge bit. I'm not really concerned about that because I'm going to be zeroing off the corner of the flat area. And then I have 2 other sheets set up, one for the walnut and one for the purple heart. So those are all ready to go. Now, of course, with this, I needed to have something to start my design with. So I decided to try a little bit of AI like everybody else is doing out there. So I opened up Microsoft Copilot, typed in a little bit of information. I was looking for something very simple, a flowery design with maybe some leaves. And so it came up with all kinds of different things, but the one that I chose was this one right here. Very simple design, had some nice bold lines and so on. Of course, with AI, there's a few things I didn't quite like. For instance, this little area right here where those four circles are, they're kind of connected together, so I'd like to make that look a little bit nicer. I might actually copy the 4 from above and just replace those below. And then I had to figure out what kind of inlay I was going to make. Of course, I could have done a really simple one color inlay, but in this case I thought I would try something with 2 colors. Wasn't sure at the time when I was thinking this through what material I was going to be using, but this could have been one of the layouts here where the gray area could be the walnut and the white areas could be the purple heart. I think that would look quite nice. Or something a little more artistic like this, where I could use like the walnut in the background behind the flower and then the rest of the design all in purple heart. And that would look great as well, but I think I'm going to go with this design here. I do like it, and I think it will, you know, it's simple and I think it'll look really good. So we're going to go with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into the software again, and I'm going to use the unified import button for 2D data. So that's one button for all of your 2D needs, and I'm going to go ahead and open up the flower and leaves.png file here and import that in. And you see that imports right into the middle of my 2D view, and I can turn on and off the bitmap by clicking that button there if I'd like to. Also in my 3D view, you'll see that it's there as well, and I can turn it on and off if I'd like to there as well. So for right now, really all I want this bitmap for is to get some outlines. So I'm going to go ahead and use our bitmap trace feature. So with that bitmap selected, I can go ahead and choose the trace bitmap feature. I'm going to make sure that I choose black and white out of the list here. And I'm just going to go with the defaults that are already set up. I'm not going to bother to mess around with that. And I'll click preview. That looks really good. So I'll just go apply and close that down. Now I'm going to hide my bitmap in the 2D view. I'll flip over to the 3D view and I'm going to hide it there as well and go back to my 2D view. Now that I've got this, I'm going to go ahead and size it to what I'd like it to be. So I'm going to move it over to the left-hand side of my board, somewhere's around there. And then I'm going to go to my 3D view because I want to use one of these new features that we have in our 3D view, which is I can actually go ahead and float, or I can go ahead and use some of the text entry fields here when I select to size my piece of clip art. So by clicking on the bottom right-hand corner here, I can scale this image, and you'll see that this bottom field has been selected, and I can just put in 5 inches and press enter, and everything will size down proportionately for me. So that's perfect. That's what I'd like it to be, and we're just gonna put that somewhere in the center, somewhere around there. I think that looks all right there. Now we have pretty much all that we need right now. If we can go ahead and start to think about how we're going to create our inlay from this graphic. So let's go back to our 2D view for a second. Select the outlines, right click on that, and we're going to ungroup those because we're going to want to move these around to their own layers a little bit so we can keep track of what's going to be cut in what material, and also at what time we're going to use the VCarve Inlay toolpath. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hold down my shift key. I'm going to select all the elements that I'd like to have made out of the purple heart. So we're going to grab those leaves, this center here, all these little guys. Oh, before I do that, actually, like I had mentioned, I want to replace this right here. So let's delete that out of there. Don't want that. I'm going to grab this, and holding down my control key, I can go ahead and drag that down and put it where it belongs. Now I could do this all in the 3D view if I'd like to. I just happen to be in the 2D view at the moment, so it makes it a little bit more convenient for me. That's great. Let's go over to our 3D view so I can show you that that is true. And we'll go ahead and select the bits now that I'd like to have made out of the purple heart. So that's going to be these leaves. Now these center bits are going to be pocketed out after I glue the purple heart in, so that I can actually glue in my maple into those pockets. So those will end up being maple in the end, but I don't need to select those right now. Select the center. We'll get all those there. These little white dots out here, that looks good. Grab this guy and this one. And the same with this one here. I'm just going to grab that outside shape because I want these inside bits to be the walnut. If I said maple before, I'm sorry, I meant walnut. And then we're going to right click on that, and we're going to say move to a new layer, and we're going to call this layer purple heart. And we'll give it a color. Let's just give it a color like an orange would be good. We'll click OK, and we'll see that we moved it for us. So now what I can do is go up to purple heart, and I'm just going to purple heart at the top. That's my layers drop down. And I'm going to go ahead and rename layer 1 to be walnut because I don't need to move those to their own layer. I've got all I want on that layer there. So we'll just call that walnut. And we'll press enter. And we'll also give that a color just so we can tell the difference. And there we go. That's perfect. Now we have all that we need. We've organized our file. So now we can go ahead and start to create our actual inlay. So let's jump over to our toolpaths tab. Now we're going to go into our VCarve Inlay toolpath. And you'll see that we have some options at the very top of this. If you've never seen this before, then I'll go through these steps individually, these fields individually. So we have our pocket depth. That's how deep we want our pocket to be. And in my case, I think 1/8 of an inch is going to be perfectly fine. We have a glue gap. Now that's the space between the face of the plug and the bottom of the pocket. And if we end up having a flat spot on our plug, then we'll have that gap. And that's where extra glue can go into to just have a place to go. Other glue will end up just squirting out the top into the surface gap. Now you can use a surface gap, obviously to be a place for your glue to go, or you may also want to use this dimension for the thickness of your bandsaw blade if you plan on surfacing the top of your plug off using a bandsaw opposed to using your CNC machine. We don't have a bandsaw, so we're going to be using our CNC machine. So that number is totally just for any glue squirting that gives it a place to kind of go. And those numbers seem to be appropriate for what I'm about to do. So 0.03 for my glue gap and 0.05 for my surface gap. Now I'm going to go ahead and choose the tools that I'm going to use to create both the pocket and the plug for our inlay. So we're going to be using a 60-degree V-bit, which is perfect for what I want. And we're going to use a clearance tool of a 1/8 inch end mill. So it's going to go in first of all and clear out a bunch of material. If the 1/8 inch end mill can fit in there, it'll clear that out for me. And then it will go in, and once I change the tool, it will go in and do all the nice sharp tapered edges with that 60-degree V-bit, which will end up being quite nice in the end. Now this part here, like I had said before, I had my materials already chosen, so I could go ahead and set up my sheets ahead of time. So I would like to tell the software where I want to put my plug, what sheet they should be on. So if I go up here and I choose from my layers manager the purple heart, and I click on the little turn down page icon, it'll automatically select, if I double click on that, all of the vectors that are on that layer. And you'll see there they are all in my 3D view. And I'm going to say use those vectors to create my plug on the sheet called purple heart. So that's great. It's going to do that for me. And then I have the option of defining the outside border of my plug. So I can either use my materials boundary if I'd like to, or I can use an offset. And this is going to be totally up to you depending on what kind of inlay you're making or what the end result is going to look like on your machine. For me, I'm going to use a vector offset, and I'm going to offset that outwards 0.25 of an inch. Oh, I got an extra point in there. Let's delete that out of there. Okay, and then I'm going to rename this VCarve Inlay dash purple heart. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and click calculate. It's going to work some magic, and you'll see that I'm going to get this warning. Now this warning, we'll talk about it in a second, but essentially what it's telling me is that my pocket isn't deep enough, or is too deep, so it ends up meaning that some of the parts of my plug are going to come to a sharp point, which means there won't be any glue gap at the bottom. And we're going to check in a minute to make sure that that's okay for this particular job, but we do give you that warning, so you will check in the end. If you know right away that that's not going to be okay, then you can just go ahead and click cancel, and then you can go ahead and readjust your toolpath settings to match what you need. But I'm okay with that, so we'll just click OK. And then we can go ahead and preview the pocket toolpaths that we have. And you'll see that we have two toolpaths. We have the clearance tool and we have the V-bit toolpath. So if we preview all those visible toolpaths, you'll see that we get nice pockets for that. That's great. And then if we go ahead and switch over to our purple heart sheet, and we turn on our vectors, you'll see that we have some vectors here and also some toolpaths for us. Now, note that my material isn't going to be wide enough for these parts, so I'm going to need to go ahead and move some of these islands, especially these two circle islands, a little bit closer into my material. And once I do that, I need to recalculate my toolpaths, and that's really important. So I'm going to go ahead and ungroup these. Once I close that down, Oh, they're already ungrouped for me. That's great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab, actually I just need to move these over a little bit. I'll need to ungroup it, I guess. And same with this one here, because we need to separate that. Now, as long as I don't change my tools, I can mess with the feeds and speeds, but not my actual tool. And I just move around these vector islands. Then what I can do is just recalculate my toolpaths again, and that's just going to make sure that those toolpaths are back on my material again. Okay, so let's close that down, and that looks really good. Again, I can do that only because I was moving around those islands. I wasn't changing my tools, and I wasn't adjusting any of those internal vectors, because if I did that, then my plug wouldn't fit back into my pocket correctly. So that looks great. That's really good. So the next thing we're going to do is go back to our beech sheet again, hide our bitmap, and we're going to go ahead and create some new toolpaths for the walnut part. So we're going to drop this down, and we are going to double click on the little turn down page on the walnut sheet, and we have all those vectors selected, and we can go ahead now and create a VCarve Inlay toolpath for that. We're going to use exactly the same settings that we have here that we had used for the last one. Everything looks great, except we want to make sure that we have the plug destination set to be walnut, and we're going to use the vector offset. Again, we're going to make that a 1/4 inch, and we're going to rename our toolpath walnut, and we can calculate that. There we have it. It's doing all the work for us, and again we're getting that error, and I'll point that out with this plug here why we're seeing that again. So we're just going to click OK. Okay, let's preview those visible toolpaths. That looks great, perfect. And let's go ahead and jump over to our purple heart, oh no, our walnut sheet, sorry. Turn on our vectors, and we'll preview those toolpaths. And like I mentioned before, we're getting that error because you'll see that in some of these areas here, they come to a sharp peak. They don't have flat bottoms. So that's up to me now to kind of consider whether or not this is going to be an issue. I'm going to make sure that I put lots of glue in there. So there should be lots of holding action going on around those walls or those side angles of those parts of the inlay. And then these areas, of course, will benefit from having a bit of a glue gap, where this one, the extra glue will just squirt out the top in the end. But I'm pretty happy with all that. I think that looks pretty good. And again, that warning was there just so I could check things out to make sure that I'm happy with everything. Okay, now I've gone ahead and done all that. And I think that's pretty much all we need to do, except for we need to add a couple extra toolpaths. Now this is where the toolpath strategy, because we don't know exactly how you want to cut out your plugs, this is where you need to now decide how you're going to do it. So for me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and choose this outside line here. Look down at the top of that. I'm going to create a profile toolpath. I'm going to start at 0. I'm going to cut all the way through my material. So I'm just going to put Z and then equals. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch end mill. I'm going to cut on that line. I'm cutting on that line specifically because I want to get rid of that taper that's been left behind by my V-bit. I want to have that nice flat surface, so when I glue it in place, my plug, there's nothing in the way to keep it from laying flat like it should. So I'm going to go ahead and cut on that line. We're not going to worry about any kind of tabs because I'm going to use double-sided tape. We're just going to go ahead and rename this here, and we can calculate that. And we can preview that visible toolpath. And you'll see that now we have a plug. So let's go now back over to our purple heart sheet, and we're going to do exactly the same there. Let's show our vectors, look straight down on our job, hold down our shift key, and we're going to grab these two, close this down first. Hold down our shift key and grab all of those border vectors, create a profile toolpath. Make sure we change the thickness because this material is slightly different. So we'll just put in Z and equals. We're going to use that 1/4 inch end mill. We're going to cut on the line again, no tabs or anything. And we're just going to call this cutout again. There we go. And we'll calculate that. And then we can preview all those tool paths. Now one thing with this one we're going to remember is that we've got these little sort of islands here, these little round plugs. We're going to make sure that we get double-sided tape underneath those. If not, they will pop off. And we're going to see how that's going to go. So we'll give that a shot. And there we have the plugs for our purple heart. Now that we have all that done, we can go ahead now and put our material down our CNC machine, and we'll start off by cutting our purple heart plugs. done cutting the Purple Heart plug, and it looks pretty good. There's been some chipping, which is a bit annoying, but hopefully with some creative fixing, we can deal with that in a little bit. So now what we're going to do is move on to the piece of walnut that we have. We're going to run the same set of toolpaths. So we're going to do a clearance tool. We're going to do the V-bit and then the cutout, just like we did a minute ago. And then once we have that all done, I'm going to catch back up with you because we're going to need to start thinking about actually cutting the pockets in this piece of beech so that we can put in our Purple Heart inlay. So there we have it. The plugs are all cut and they look pretty good. The walnut one turned out really well. I'm not sure about the Purple Heart one, but we're gonna find out how it worked out. I did save some of the chips from it, so I can use those to pack in and maybe glue any weird spots, but hopefully it won't come to that. So the next thing we're gonna do now is to create the actual, or to cut the actual pockets in the beech. We're gonna start off by gluing up the Purple Heart first. So we're going to do the pockets for that. So there's going to be the clearance tool, the 1/8 inch end mill, and then the 60-degree V-bit to clean it up. And then we're going to go ahead and glue that in. And we'll catch up once I get that all done. So we got the pocket all cut, we got the plug all cut, and I've dry fitted it together so it does fit quite nicely, I think. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a ton of glue to this, to the pocket, and also maybe some to the plug. And then we're going to stick them together, and I'm going to put some weight on it. And all I have around here for weight is a full paint can and some pieces of wood. So hopefully that's going to do the trick. And then we're going to let it set up. And then when we come tomorrow, we're going to go ahead and cut off the top of that plug. And fingers crossed, we're going to have the start of a really nice looking inlay. That's probably not the best way to clamp it, but that's what I got on hand. And I think it's going to be okay. I guess we'll find out tomorrow. That's it for today. Tomorrow we're going to come in and we're going to surface off that plug. And fingers crossed, everything is going to work out well so we can go ahead and do our pockets for the walnut leaves. So see you tomorrow. Okay, so we've left this overnight to set up, and hopefully the amount of weight that I have on it is going to be good enough for this job. So let's go ahead and just unstack it and we'll see how things look. Well, everything is where I left them, so that's a good sign. Everything seems to be in there nice and tight, so that's good. So that's pretty much all we can do for right now. So the next step of this whole process is we have to go ahead and remove the excess material off of our plugs. So there's a couple different ways we can do that. And it depends on what job you're actually, or what the end result of your job you're looking for. So we can either zero off the top of our material and we can pocket down a distance, or, which I prefer even more, is to pretend that this material is my machine bed, and I'm going to zero my clearing tool path off of my material here, this beech, and then actually make the tool go up and then pocket down to 0 again, which would be perfect, and it should line up, you know, spot on in the end. That's great. I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch end mill for that. I think that'll be a good tool for it. And now all I just need to do is figure out how much material is here that I need to get rid of. So I could go ahead and use the old caliper method, which would work as well. We can just kind of drop it on there and have a peek at, if I can get them to work for myself, have a peek at how thick that is in the end. So it seems to think it's around 0.66 of an inch left. And that's going to vary depending on how flat my material is, and that seems pretty good. It's around 6/6 of an inch, but we can even do better than this because we've added into this toolpath strategy a field that'll actually tell you the exact number that should be there, so that we can go ahead then and use that number in our clearing toolpath or our surfacing toolpath if we want to. And so we're going to do that. So let's go ahead and have a look at the software, and I'll show you exactly where that is and how we can use it. Okay, so I'm back in the software again, and you can see that I have up the sheet, the purple heart sheet, and the 3 toolpaths that we've created to cut the plug out with. Now, there's a special feature of the plug toolpath, the clearance toolpath. If you click on that, you'll see at the very top here, we've got a thing called the plug stop. Now that stock, excuse me, not stop, the plug stock, you'll notice that that number is 0.665. That's the bit of material that's sitting proud of the beech that we have over there. So what we can use this number to actually create the clearance toolpath to get rid of that plug. That'll be our material thickness that we're going to use, okay? So it's important that you know where to find that number. Again, it's inside of one of the toolpaths that are used to cut the plug, okay? So now what we're going to do is we are going to go back to our 2D view just for a second. We'll scoot over to our beech sheet. Now, typically what I could do is if I hadn't gone and moved those islands, those 2 little raised dots, islands, then I could actually just use those vectors as my regions for my pocket toolpath. I've gone ahead and moved those, so I can't use those anymore because it doesn't line up with the finished part over there. So what I'm going to do, and I think this is the best for this whole project, is use the same vector to clear off both the purple heart and the walnut in the end. So the same shape. That way any tooling marks I have will sort of all be contained in one area. I think that's the best way to do it. Of course, you can just leave your comment if you've got a better way to do it. I could surface the whole thing off, which might be the best, and we may end up having to do that in the end anyway. But for right now, we're just going to do the area that my inlay, the full area that my inlay is. So to do that, what I'm going to do is select all of these vectors. And if you remember correctly, when I created my inlay toolpaths, I had an offset of 1/4 inch. So we're going to go ahead and offset all those vectors off outwards by 1/4 inch, and we're going to select the new one. There we have it. So we can close this down. And that vector right there is what we're going to use to limit our toolpath. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up a new sheet because I'm using a different thickness of material, if you remember correctly. So let's go up here to our sheets. We're going to add the new sheet, and we're going to call this new sheet, to rename that. We'll call this surface purple heart, PH for purple heart. Great. Okay, and we'll go back over here again, and we're going to grab this outline, right click on that, and we're going to copy that to the sheet called surface purple heart, and it's lined up perfectly where it is, where it should be, and then we can go ahead and select that. Now what I want to do is look at my material setup. So we're going to look at my material setup. The thickness of my material is going to be that plug stock number plus a little bit, because I'm not quite confident that that's totally flat. So it was 0.66. So if I make it 0.7 of an inch, I think that'll be okay. Our datum will be set to the bottom left-hand corner because I'm going to be looking at zeroing off the original corner of that beech material. We're going to go ahead and machine off the machine bed. Now remember, it's not the actual machine bed, it's the surface of that beech material. And we are going to, all of those rapid Z-gaps and home start positions are safe and appropriate for my machine. So I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. I'll select that vector, and I'm going to do a pocket toolpath. I'm going to remove some of these bits out of there because I've got 2 of them in there. I'm sorry, don't edit, I want to delete, remove that out of there. So my start depth is going to be at 0. I'm going to go down the thickness of that material, which is going to be 0.7 of an inch. Okay, so I'm going to go right down to the very bottom of that with that 1/4 inch end mill. Okay, and that seems great. I'm going to use a raster toolpath, and we don't need any profile paths, that's fine. We're just going to do none. And we are going to go outside of that just a little bit. So we're going to go minus 0.125 of an inch, just so we're outside or clear of everything, so we can get rid of everything that we want to. And we're going to call this pocket. Delete purple heart. Okay, and we'll calculate that. Okay, and then we're going to preview that visible toolpath, and you'll see that we actually should look like we're cutting right through our material in the end. And that's exactly what we want, so that looks perfect. I'm happy with that. Okay, so now we have that toolpath all set up. I'm going to save it off, get the machine warmed up, and we'll get this running, and we'll see what the result looks like. Okay, there we go. I think I put plenty of glue on there in all the spots that are needed. So now we're just going to put the weight on top, and we're going to leave it until tomorrow again. That way it'll all be ready to surface. We can do that tomorrow. So that's it for today. I'm pretty excited about the end result, but we won't see until tomorrow. Okay, so welcome to day 3 of this VCarve Inlay. So today what we're going to do is we are going to take off the weight and we're going to surface off this plug of the walnut, which hopefully will look okay in the end. So just a couple things to keep in mind is that, remember, this is the plug stock. So I showed you the last time we cleared off a plug in the software. To find that number, it's in your plug toolpath. Okay, so we know what the software thinks is left, but it's always good to have a little check with your calipers to make sure that's accurate. So what we're going to want to do when we create the toolpath to do this, remember, we're going to zero off our machine bed, which is really the top of this beech. We're going to set up our material, the thickness of the plug stock or a little bit more, and then we're going to go ahead and cut down the depth of that plug stock. Okay, so we're actually going to zero here, the tool will go up and go all the way down and just touch the surface of this beech in the end. If you forget how to do that, just rewind the video a little bit and you can look at how I did it when we did the purple heart plug clearance or clear toolpath. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop back into the software, create that toolpath, and then I'm going to run it and we'll see what we end up with in the end. Hopefully it's going to look really great. Wow, I'm really happy with that. I think of all the inlays I've done so far, that was the easiest, of course, to actually get the toolpath set up, but also the end result is really, really nice. There is one little thing that I'm going to fix right now. There's a little bit of a step around the vector that I used to clear off those plugs with. So I'm just going to go ahead and resurface this all, just to drop it down so that's nice and flat in the end. Then we're going to add a beeswax finish to it, a local company that makes it in the village I live in. We're going to use that to finish it up, and then we'll have a look at the finished product, and I'm really excited to see it once it's all done and finished. I am really happy with how that turned out. Obviously, there's always things I would do a bit different, but I contribute the success of this to this new version 12 feature, the VCarve Inlay toolpath strategy. You know, maybe I might have changed up the wood. Maybe I wouldn't have used the walnut in the center of the flowers, but hey, you know what? I guess if you live and learn a bit, eh? But it looks really, really nice in the end. So just a little recap of the VCarve Inlay toolpath and some tips that I have to share with you. First of all, the toolpath will get you 80% there. Don't forget, you're still going to need to go ahead and create the profile toolpath so you can cut out your plug, and also your surfacing toolpath so you can get rid of the rest of that plug once you have it glued up into your pocket. Okay, so you're going to need that. Now, what's really nice is that the toolpath strategy will give you not only the pocket toolpaths, but also the plug toolpaths. And don't forget that inside that plug toolpath is that special number that you're going to need in order to be able to remove the plug or the extra plug material off, obviously depending on what process you're going to use for that. Another great thing about the feature is it will actually mirror the vectors for you already, so you don't need to mess that up like I've done tons of times in the past. So a couple of things to share with you about how to get a nice successful inlay. Of course, surfacing your pocket material off, or all of your material off, nice and flat, so when you glue it up everything is true. That would be perfect. Having a really good way to clamp your materials together. I don't suggest the paint bucket and wood bits, but it did work for me, so maybe that's going to be good for you as well. Measure your tools, because you're going to make sure those tools are perfect. Now, a couple things that I want to warn you about is that it's a good idea not to, after you've calculated your tool paths, to change out the tools individually within the tool paths that the VCarve Inlay strategy gives you. That's not going to be a good idea. If things go wrong and they're not exactly what you like, then delete your tool paths and then delete the vectors that the toolpath created for you, and then start again from scratch. If you move the vectors like I did, just be very, very careful that you think about what you're doing before you do that, and then obviously recalculate your toolpaths appropriately. And I think that's pretty much it. I think that with this new toolpath strategy, your success rate is going to go through the roof with this sort of thing. And don't forget that if you haven't had a chance to try this yet, then go ahead and download our trial version of V12 and you can give it a go for yourself. If you've got V12 already and you haven't tried it yet, VCarve Pro 12 or Aspire 12, then give it a go. You never know what you're going to cut with it, and the results are pretty nice. Anyway, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't followed this channel, please follow below. If you have a comment, then please leave it and I'll get you an answer as soon as I can. And until next time, have lots of fun and make really cool stuff like this.